who quotes this notion of Adin Kriyat Shema Kedin Tefillah. He quotes the Rabbi Yisrael's things, but then he says, and this basically is quoting text number 5, V'ish Mekilei D'Shayni Tefillah Shehi B'Kashet Tzorach Min HaMelech. Okay, that Kriyat Shema is notably different than prayer. Prayer, you're requesting your needs from God. Shema, you're just reading out verses from Deuteronomy and Numbers. Like that doesn't require the same level of intensity of intentionality. It doesn't need the same intentionality around it. Like you have to know what you're saying, but like you don't need as much mental intentionality.
Becomes the same thing. Like you're
yeah. Well, you ideally should. There, the motivator is so it seems that Shema, okay, it's a recitation, which is, I think, when we think about even just the language of calling it Kriyat Shema, it's literally you're just doing a recitation of the Shema. You're going through these verses in Deuteronomy and Numbers. Great. Birkat Hamazon, really the major drivers we saw was this notion of it's still a mitzvah. You can't just get out of it just because it's because you're drunk. Well, you still you're obligated to say it. So say it. Hopefully you should have some intentionality of what you're saying. And then there's prayer. Prayer really demands intentionality. And that's something that of course, when we talk about prayer, we can definitely delve more deeply into, but there's a lot of talk about kavanat halev, of mental intentionality around prayer, which these other practices don't seem to really necessitate as much.
Interesting, because I think at their core, they really should, for what they are.
Yeah.
Right? It's Torah mitzvah versus request.
Yeah. These are just, it's interesting because Kriyat Shema, okay, you're essentially just reading them. Like, great.
Yeah, I would think, when I think of the Shema,
you'd also want it to sink in.
The most intentional declaration of being Jewish.
Well, that seems to be something that we saw in text 8, that ideally you should be doing this not drunk.
Right.
Ideally. But once you're there,
because it's a mitzvah,
then you can't just get out of it, oh, I'm drunk, sorry. You have really this notion of ideally you shouldn't do it drunk, but if you say Shema before you get drunk, but once you're there, you have this Torah obligation, say it, that's fine. And there's this notion that gets tied up with some of these rabbis of saying it's just like prayer. But if it's like prayer, that means you can be tipsy or whatever. You can have had some drinks, but drunken prayer is problematic. So maybe drunken Shema is also problematic. But also, there are those who are lenient, because this is something that is noticeably different than prayer that requires that intentionality. So ultimately, at the end of the day, all you need to know is it's okay.